Alright, in this episode of Throttle Stop Garage, we're going to show you how you take a stack of wooden discs and turn it into a Porsche 917 style shift knob. Okay, so if you joined us last time, you saw me build this carbon fiber sheathed shifter. Okay, so the shifter turned out really well, but one thing that you'll note is when it's in the car, it's just going to look black. Like until you get quite close to it, you don't notice the carbon fiber at all, which is exactly the look I was going for. Again, it's not a show me kind of car, but there is going to be some wood inside the car. It is a 60s car. That's kind of a theme that I'm going with here. So when I first purchased this lovely black shifter ball, I thought it was great, right? It's kind of rubbery, it's got good grip, but I don't think it's going to fit very well in this car. So I wanted to make something a little bit nicer, and there is some other wood in the car. That is a theme. It's just dashes of that kind of stuff throughout to accent the interior of the car. Well, I've always been attracted to wooden shift knobs. I've built wooden shift knobs for every car that I've owned for probably the last 20 plus years. And there's one design that I've wanted to try for a long time. Maybe you've seen it too. It's had a bit of a renaissance here lately. And it's the 917 Porsche shift knob, which is a segmented knob. Okay, so it's layers of wood. And in this case, I'm going to try a bunch of different designs because I have no idea what it is that I'm going to like or which one I'm going to want. And I figured while I'm waiting for other people to finish up parts for me, I'm just going to plow ahead. And I don't have a lot of time. Work is really keeping me very busy, not able to be out in the garage as often as I would like. I don't own a wood lathe. There's no fancy tools involved with doing any of this, just a little bit of ingenuity and no fear of failure, which does kind of characterize this particular channel. All right, so stay tuned and let's get to work.
So while the debates online will rage over what exact wood was used in the original Porsche 917 shift knobs, I quite frankly don't really care. I had some mahogany lying around, and there is going to be mahogany in the rest of the car. So I did have some rather thick pieces of mahogany just in my collection of wood. Yeah, I collect wood too. So I decided to resaw it. Broke out the old bandsaw and resaw the wood. And then if you've never done this kind of thing before, then, you know, out comes the hand plane. And I do find this quite relaxing, actually. But, you know, you square it up and true it. And I'm trying to hit a certain dimension for thickness. You know, it doesn't have to be exact here. And I'm not too sure what's going to work best. And once I've got that material dimensioned up the way I want it, whoa, focus coming in and out, then hole saw, right, without the center drill, and then I'm going to make discs. I'll center drill the ones that need to be center drilled later, but clearly you can't have a whole center drilled on the very, very top piece. Then the contrasting wood in this case is maple. So I've got some maple. This piece happens to be pretty nicely figured, but not as bright and white clear as I was sort of wanting. And then there's a center disc in the middle of walnut.
That'll work.
So with the rounds cut, it's over to the disc sander just to true them up. Now I've placed that aluminum flat bar on the surface of the sander and pushed it right up against the disc to make it a zero clearance sander, which makes it very safe. So even though my hands are close to the wheel, I've still got all my fingers, didn't sand any of them off. Yeah, so that toughened epoxy's got little micro rubber balloon thingies in it. That means it'll move around a little bit. It's pretty squishy stuff. So at this point, I've drilled holes through the center of a bunch of the discs that I want to place on the bottom. And then I 3D printed a little aligning jig just to help keep those things centralized. I am going to be turning these later, so I'd like to get them close. And now you can see the ones that are coming in without the holes drilled. So you do need two different kinds. And I've got some sandpaper there taped down to the bench just to square things up.
Okay, so these have dried up overnight. Now they're pretty much ready to go. Okay, so the epoxy is hardened off. And I've designed and 3D printed a couple of tools. So I'll apply some sandpaper to the radiuses here, which will match the radius that I'm looking for from the knob.
All right, so now those 3D printed aligning jigs have to be cut off, and then I'm drilling out the last little bit of them there. Really, it's light plastic, no problem. And then gluing in some dowels in order that I can turn these on my drill press. So I don't own a lathe, and here we go. So I've put some 60 grit paper on my 3-inch sander and just roughly got them into a round shape. And then I'm using the 3D printed jigs in order to get the ball shape perfected. Right, so every once in a while I have to, yeah, a little bit of coarse work, some hand work, and then in we go. Now I've cut a lot of the footage of this out. It's kind of boring just to watch me sand endlessly. And I am wearing a dust mask. It's incredibly dusty and dirty. But at the end of this, I was pretty happy with the overall turnout, but the bands were pretty wide, so I wanted to try version 2. So in the first version, I was using hand-planed blocks of wood, and it actually took quite a long time to do that. And I just wondered if it was possible to knock some big plugs out of the thick stock, then take them over to my chop saw, hot melt glue them on to another sort of sacrificial part, and then using a supplementary fence on the saw so the pieces don't go flying at me, if I could cut the thin discs that way, and then sand them up and start with the second ball.
Okay, so I didn't cover all the details of the drilling and everything else, the sanding, because it's largely the same as what it was before. So I cut those thin discs over on the chop saw. That actually worked out a lot better than I thought it was going to work. So it worked really well with the glue, holding things together. Now there is the part. We're just waiting for the epoxy to cure. So we're just about out of the woods on this one, but we'll come back tomorrow and we'll turn this into a sphere.
So one of the details that I left out on that version is that with the really, really thin maple bands, now they're down around 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters thick only. So I did glue this one up in several stages in order to sort of make that work properly. And then again, on with the drill press, but this time I've taken some cheap chisels and made a nasty gouge. So if you're a wood turner, look away. That's it did work, but you have to be really careful to avoid side loading the chuck, right? So the drill press is not designed to have loads going sideways on it, or else hilarious things will happen. But there's the first time the whole chuck assembly popped out. It happened about 10 times. And it depended on the durometer of the wood. So the harder the wood, the more frequently that chuck would pop out, because you have to go at it a little bit more with a little bit more vigor. But using that gouge was a lot faster than actually trying to turn this stuff just using the sandpaper, even with the 3-inch air grinder going at it there. Yeah, that's fast, but it's not real accurate. There's the third time that it popped out. And every time it popped out, I had no idea. Like, you don't want to reach and grab it or anything, so you just let it go. It never hit the floor. I have no idea why, but it never hit the floor. So anyway, so then we get it all done, and then I was doing this sort of final detailed sanding using that 3D printed jig again.
Okay, so now that the ball is basically finished with the turning, I've sanded it to 320 grit. It feels really nice, so super happy with the way that these have all turned out, actually. But now with the mahogany, I'd like to get the mahogany bands to be just a little bit darker, so we're going to use a chemical stain. Now what I'm using is, to do this, is just a little bit of sodium hydroxide. So in this instance, the mix is about 1/4 teaspoon in a cup of warm-ish water. Again, all safety precautions with this kind of stuff. It's caustic, but what it does is essentially oxidizes the tannins in the wood, and it'll give it a nice stain. So I'm just gonna throw a glove on and I'll just give it a dip. This also serves to raise the grain on the ball, and you'll get a nice final smooth finish. Okay, so there's my mix, and all we're going to do is just roll the ball, and you can see almost instantly that the mahogany will turn color. Now it's not just turning color because it's wet, it's turning color because the tannins in the wood are oxidizing. So it'll come out a sort of beautiful brown color. Right, so I'm going to run inside now and actually just rinse that in water, and then we're done. Then it's on to clear.
And on we go with my Darth Vader impersonation as we get going with the clear application. So this is just an automotive 2K urethane clear. I've used it on a lot of wood and cars, and it works great. Like, it's really durable stuff. The biggest challenge to getting this done, of course, is knowing that you've got to just get it covered. And I have 4 balls. I actually did 5 total at the end. And you got to get them all cleared up. And you have to get them covered, and you don't want to whack yourself with the setup. So it's a little bit tricky to do, but it wasn't too bad. Now, when you get the 2 coats of urethane applied, so here's the second coat going on, it's never going to be perfect. So if you're going to try something like this, the wood, there's a grain, a texture to the wood. And you try don't pound the urethane on like crazy. Just spray it as properly applied, and then you're done with it. Now you let it sit then for a couple of weeks, and you have to wet sand it off. Almost all of it will come off because you're just grain filling. This first 2 coats is just to fill the grain and make it smooth. Then you go back and apply 2 more coats, which I did not tape and didn't show, and then you're finished, right? So then you'll get a really beautiful finish out of this, out of the clear.
Okay, so it's a couple of weeks later, and we're done. All right, so there are the balls. So I waited a couple of weeks. I waited about 2 weeks for the finish to sort of fully cure and shrink and off-gas and everything that these finishes normally need to do. And what you end up with after... So then I wet sanded them again. We'll see if the camera can kind of... So we'll just see if the camera can pick that up. Yeah, it looks like it's getting it good. Okay, so that's the shift ball done. So that's after waiting again a couple of weeks, then sanding it with 600 and then 800 grit sandpaper to get rid of all of the little imperfections on the wood texture. And then you just shoot 2 more coats of clear, and that's the kind of result that you could expect. All right, so now I'm going to mount the balls to some bases. So I've had a very good friend of mine, thanks Matt, machined me up some bases. These fit onto the shifter very nicely, and we'll stick the 2 parts together and we'll see how it all turns out. Okay, so first up, just a little masking. We don't want any of the epoxy that we're using to get onto these nicely turned stainless steel surfaces. So
I know it's a little unlike me to try to make less work for myself, but the tape actually really did help. The JB weld is going to get everywhere. Okay, with that done, we're going to lay out a little bit of that JB weld, and then I'm adding that colorant into it, just enough to turn it black. I don't want it gray on the off chance any of it's seen. And then I'm only applying it to the shaft part. I'm not applying it to the flat. And then I'm inserting and twisting, as the squeeze out is going to actually provide enough adhesive to glue the whole thing down.
okay, so all the shift knobs are done. Really super happy actually with the way that they all turned out. You can see, you know, the one with the wider bands, right? It's just actually maybe a bit dark, but I like it. Narrower bands, but red. See if the camera will focus on it. And then finally, I think the one that's going to win and end up in the final car. If we can get a focus. The bases have just been attached with a little bit of JB weld, and I've added some colorant into the JB weld, but you can't see the divide line. So that actually worked out perfectly, so just the way I wanted that to work.
Alright, just to throw the ball on the shifter, and ta-da! There it is. I certainly like that more than the rubber ball.
Okay, so now I'm going to put those away. I don't want them out in the shop, that's for sure. Alright, so thanks again for tuning in, and that's a wrap for this episode, and we'll catch you on the next episode. There's a lot of things that I'm quite picky about. Interiors, everything, really. I'm not even going to say it, I'm going to cut that. Everything I'm picky about. I'm picky about everything. That's why this car has taken 8 million years to build. There's the end part.